right, welcome everyone. This is Sheila Kumar Hay of Ecstatic Birth, and I'm here today with a dear friend of mine who I feel like has, been preparing for these times and has so many gifts to share with all of us. Welcome. This is my friend Christina Morassi. Hi, Christina.
Hi, Sheila. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today because it is so timely.
Yes, yes. So what I want to say about Christina is I've known her for years, and she is really like one of the most badass women that I know. She was running a super successful entrepreneurial business and then decided, you know what, like I'm done, and unplugged everything and really allowed herself to, to do what she calls like surrender deep into her feminine. And she surrendered and she surrendered. And I have witnessed you, Christina, over the years, like really not be afraid to like dive deep into the darkness, and you come up with magnificent gifts, which you now share with your clients. You're now sharing in this new body of work that you've developed around the dark feminine. And, we were talking a few months back. I was like, Christina, how did you know, like, this is the age of the dark feminine with COVID-19 and the pandemic. And also, for ecstatic birth and the work that we do in the birthing world, there's so much that we gain by allowing ourselves to look at the darkness. And I know that that's a place most women don't actually want to go. So I would love to begin by having you talk a little bit about your journey, and specifically, like, why the heck did you want to dive into the darkness in the first place? And what kind of gifts are we talking about? Like, what have you seen that you are really passionate about sharing with women at this time?
Oh, that's such a good question. I mean, the first answer is I'm not sure I chose to dive into the dark. Like I'm not sure any woman like willingly, lovingly, excitedly decides to go into the dark. It's normally life that's kind of giving you an opportunity to do that. And so for me, it's like, if we want to go back to like the way deep origin story, some of my wounding and growing up, we all have our own wounding. As way back when I was 13, my brother died of cancer. He was 11. And so that left a really big hole in my life. And so I feel like I have done 20 years of healing, solid, like hardcore healing on this journey. And it's still something that I deal with. So I think for me, like, had that intense experience not happened when I was 13, that was a moment for me to meet the dark feminine, right? Like to understand the deeper aspects of life. When I was 13, it was almost a rite of passage, which I didn't understand then, but I can see now. And so I believe that each one of us as women have had these moments of rites of passage where life has kind of, smacked us upside the head with a cosmic 2x4 in order to feel the deeper aspects of life that call us to go deep into the underworld and into the dark. So I wouldn't say that I chose it. And really, there were just these wounds that I had emotionally that I wanted to clear out because I knew that I had a big purpose here on the planet. And those wounds were getting in the way of me housing my full power. So that's kind of the answer of like what I'm super, super, super passionate about is helping all women like reclaim their raw feminine power, the totality of it, learning how to house it, and then learning how to use it in their natural design of what I call their feminine operating system. Now, unfortunately, we live in a world that doesn't teach us anything about any of this. On some level, I always joke, I'm like, listen, raw feminine power is a potency to it. It's almost like a nuclear power plant inside us, that raw power that we have access to. And no one taught us how to use it. We really needed like a license to operate heavy machinery. And like we didn't get it, right? So that's what I'm passionate about, is first helping women to understand how much power they have inside them, but then understanding how to use it. And so I want to give women that, license to operate heavy machinery and the operator's manual of like how to learn how to use this for our mission and our purpose on the planet. So in this body of work that I call the feminine operating system, the dark feminine is a very, very important piece of the puzzle. So if you could imagine that at some point there will be a book on the feminine operating system. I have a colleague that calls it a PhD in vagina, because it's basically based on all this material that I've been studying over the last 20 years of in the healing arts and studying energy work and body work and women's empowerment and sensuality and wanting to weave it all together to write this operator's manual, right? So someday there will be a book. And so you can imagine that the dark feminine is like a very important chapter in that book. And so that's where I am right now, is sharing that with the world. So one last piece to just answer your question is, the things I said, we live in a world that doesn't support us in our raw feminine power, and in fact, kind of denigrates it, really. We live in a patriarchal society based on masculine values, if you will. Now, when I'm talking about feminine and masculine, I'm talking about the archetypal energies in the universe of yin, yang, left brain, right brain, lunar, solar, this is the engine of the universe that helps to make it go. So we live in a world that really celebrates the masculine values in the patriarchal culture. And so we've all had this patriarchal operating system like automatically installed into our hard drive, and none of us had a say in the matter. And so unfortunately, we women are trying to run the wrong machinery. It's like trying to run Windows, put Windows on a Mac computer, or, put diesel in a gasoline car. Like, it doesn't work, and meanwhile, I want to just say too, that the patriarchal operating system doesn't really serve men either, but at least it's in their wheelhouse. Unfortunately, it's based on masculine values, but not the exalted form. It's sort of the lower form of like greed and aggression and war and all of these things and competition. But at least it's in the right wheelhouse for them. So for us as women, we need to learn how to break free from that like operating system that isn't ours, a patriarchal operating system, break free from our conditioning and learn our natural design of these beautiful feminine machines of our bodies. And so I think that's what really makes me want to dive deep, is to get free and be in my full power and do what I came here to do.
Oof. Yes, yes. And, like so many things I want to say to what you just said. The first thing is, when you were talking about like, we're running the wrong operating system, the first thing that came to mind is, like that go, go, go mentality, right? Like as women, to have to keep going and going and going, which is a very, I think, masculine energy way of being. And we talk about like how the feminine is more cyclical, right? Like there are these cycles of like, planting the seed grows, lives, thrives, falls away, dies. And then from that darkness comes like the new life. Mm-hmm. And, birth, obviously childbirth is very much a part of that cycle. And there's also like, we can see this metaphor all around us. Like right now in this moment of time with the pandemic and everything that's going on around the planet, it feels like we're in a global birthing field. Like this is such a moment of like global contraction, right? And, when you talk about like, we're trying to operate on diesel, or like we're on the wrong operating system, I'm thinking, yeah, we've been taught like when those contractions come to say, no, danger, avoid, numb, like, right? So whether that's in the birthing room physically to like, we don't want to feel the contractions. Contractions are bad. No, actually in birth, contractions are the work your body has to do to help you expand. Yes. Now, in the world, when we hit these like tough, gnarly road bumps, similarly, we've been taught to self-medicate, to avoid, to resist. And what I hear you saying is actually that diving deep into the darkness, that whether it's an embrace of it or a surrender, or that is actually where the source of your power is. That's what I heard in your words. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, because that's, I could geek out. I call it dark feminine physics. I could try in a few sentences. Do you want me to explain why? Like for the left brain folks in the world, because I geek out on this stuff completely. Normally I have a little prop, which I didn't think to bring with me. But anyway, so back in the day, I studied a modality called polarity therapy that was all about energy work, but really the body-mind connection and so much more. So I learned about how energy works. And really, we live in an electromagnetic universe. So every living thing is like a magnet. There's a positive pole, there's a negative pole, and there's a neutral pole in the middle. And it is the energy that circulates between these two poles that creates power. So if you look at this as metaphorically in the world, as a culture, we like to focus on the positive always, like just make, have positive thoughts, and like we only want to like feel the good things. And so we only want the positive end of this magnet. But if that's where we put our attention, we actually have no power. Because the power comes from embracing both ends of the spectrum. That literally creates the arc of polarity and the electricity and the power. So I believe that's what's happening with the dark feminine, is she comes in and she's like pushing our, like noses into the dirt of the dark, because she wants us to be able to hold both ends of this spectrum, because this is life. The entire world lives on like expansion and contraction. Yang energy going out, yin energy coming in, left brain, right brain, estrogen, testosterone. The whole entire universe is built on this duality. And the only way you learn how to, you don't think you ever escape duality per se, but you can learn to work with it by embracing the full spectrum. So the dark feminine often comes in to take us into the dark so that we can excavate and learn how to hold both ends to be in our full power.
Yeah.
That's my dark feminine physics.
I love that dark feminine physics. And it's so interesting because, one of the things we talk about in the birthing world, there's so much fear, right? In relation to childbirth, there's like the fear of pain, there's the fear of motherhood, there's the fear of, and most people don't actually want to look at the fears. They just want to look at like, how can I have the pleasure? How can I have an orgasm during birth? How can I not feel pain, actually is more like the most common one. But I've seen something very similar in that when a woman is willing to actually look at her fears and not only like look at them and examine them, but like be okay with them and maybe even thrive as a result of the possibility of them coming in, it actually takes that like looming power away from her. So when you describe like the physics of it, it's almost like when you're focusing on like, okay, how can I have this amazing birth experience, but you're not willing to go here, the power of this is so much stronger, and it'll make that negative outcome that you fear so much more likely. Whereas when you look at it, you're like the sky's the limit, right?
And also, if you can imagine, like, the more comfortable you are in the negative pole, if you will, then it's kind of like you have more power. So the deeper you go into the dark, the more you can go into the light. It's like the deeper you go into the muck, the higher you can go in the light, right? So like they're very related.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes me also think of just on a sensation level, when you we talk about like when you numb the pain, you're also numbing the pleasure. So your range becomes very limited. But when you're willing to feel, like your potential for pleasure skyrockets.
That's it.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm wondering about something, especially right now, as we are in this global birthing field. I feel like one of the things that has made the feminine so maligned is, fear of the cycle, right? Fear of that, like we always want to like be growing and rising, but like that fear of like the downside, that fear of like flailing or even death or decay. I feel most of our patriarchal world culture is really about avoiding this fear of death, and wanting to, in the physical world of childbirth, it looks like over medicalization, trying to control something that is ultimately uncontrollable, like at its core. And so I'm just curious about your perspective on death in general, given the dark feminine and the work that you're doing.
Well, you mentioned the cycles, and so I believe the dark feminine is wanting to come in to remind us of the cycles of nature, the entire way the world works. I say there's birth, there's life, there's death. There's birth, there's life, there's death, and repeat. It's the entire universe works in this way. Nature works in this way. Birth works in this way. Our human bodies work in this way. So to go against the natural cycles and laws of the universe just doesn't make any sense. And unfortunately, that's really what's going on in our patriarchal culture, right?
Yeah.
So the dark feminine comes in to invite us to get more comfortable with the death part of the cycle. And when we do, again, we become more alive, if you will. And, one of the ways that I learned this process was years and years ago. I was fortunate enough to study some shamanic work. And so there are certain traditions where they will journey into the underworld with this intention to die. They call it a dismemberment journey. And it's fascinating because their belief is that we all are going to have moments of death, whether we like it or not, literal and metaphoric. We cannot stop that because it is the law of the universe and of nature, right? So we can either willingly go into death, or, life is going to give us that opportunity to go into death. So in the shamanic practice, I learned that if I willingly allowed myself to have periodic moments of death, I could now get in with the cycles of life. And so it was a very interesting process, this dismemberment journey where you would journey into the lower world. And, it's sort of the journeying is of the soul, and you're using your imagination, and it's a deep process, obviously. So I want to honor this tradition, but you surrender to a death of some kind, and often you don't know what's going to happen. It sort of just comes to you in the moment. It's like a meditation of some kind. And often animals come and like tear you limb from limb, and elephants might come in and stomp on your bones, and then like a wildfire comes in and just turns you to ash. And you find maybe at first that would be a little terrifying for some, but you learn to actually surrender to it and find the ecstasy in it, and like the amazingness of just surrendering to that death, because at some point, once you die, you get to be reborn. It's like this phoenix that rises up from the ashes, and then that's now you're being reborn into the next aspect of your life. So I learned that 20 years ago. And so that's something that I believe the dark feminine is coming in to say, listen, y'all need to get comfortable dying. And ideally it's a metaphoric death, because if you do these metaphoric deaths, then you're in with the cycles of nature and life. If you don't, then life might come in, and that's when you might have that intense car accident, or you might get that diagnosis of a disease, or you might go through a really intense divorce. And then that's a different kind of death that life forced on you, generally, in my theory, because you didn't willingly embrace death before that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That feels to me like almost like the deepest contraction that we have the most resistance to. And it's interesting when you were speaking about being ripped apart limb from limb and die. I was like, oh my God, that sounds horrible. But you actually said it with like a glee. It was like, woo. So how do you have any advice for, all of us to become I know you are enraptured. I know this about you. You're enraptured with the dark feminine. You're devoted to the dark feminine. You're really a voice for her to bring her gifts to life. And, again, bringing it back to childbirth, it's this idea when you give birth, there's always something that's dying, right? That's the cycle. So, for a first-time mom, it's like the death of the maiden and the birth of the mother. And we're constantly, as people, rebirthing all the time. We're rebirthing ourselves, we're birthing our businesses, we're birthing our dreams and desires. And so, it's one thing to be given these contractions, but I think what you're talking about is the deepest contraction of all. And so what advice do you have for those of us that are new on the journey to really be able to embrace that level of, I think it's a really deep surrender,
Yes.
what you're talking about.
For sure. I mean, death would be the ultimate surrender.
Yeah.
Right. So by all means, well, this is a deep process, obviously. And, one wouldn't want to kind of go in willy-nilly into the dark without some tools or some support or, some loving friends. And so, we talked about, I said, would it be all right if I offered everyone a death ritual that I have? And it's a guided meditation. So that would be my first recommendation, is that, we'll put the link somewhere around here. And I'd love to invite you to try out the death ritual. Now, it's not the one I just mentioned because that's not my expertise to teach. But it's one that I created for myself. And it is really about a deep surrender into the deepest yin and into a deep letting go. And so I think I would invite everyone to start to just be looking for places where you can explore this. I do have a Facebook group that you're welcome to come into. We are talking about the feminine operating system. We're talking about the dark feminine. And so I'm trying to share resources around that, because I don't know that I have like a quick little like tips 2 and 3 to explore the dark feminine. Like, I don't think it quite, I'll think about that, but I don't have that at the ready, I would say. But I'm certainly trying to create a space where we can explore that all together. And, I would say, I guess, on some level, for most of us, it might be good just to understand the why of it to begin. Like, even that's why I like to teach the content that's a little geeky, to speak to your left brain. So your left brain can be like, oh, maybe there's a reason to do this, so that it's not just like this willy-nilly, like feminine chaos, which is also awesome. But I like to speak to a woman's left brain and then gently walk her into her right, so because I really believe to step into our feminine operating system, we have to rewire our brains. Like, because they've been hardwired into the patriarchal operating system, we've got to rewire it literally in our neurons, in order to get into the feminine operating system. So, some other things to think about too are, here's the thing, the feminine is inherently dark. Simple. If you think about the yin yang symbol from Chinese cosmology, the feminine is represented by the black side of the yin yang symbol, right? So the feminine is yin. It is a dark cave. It is the moon. It is the womb. It is deep into the earth. So to start to just get a little bit more comfortable with those pieces, like I was talking with a colleague who's, heard me talk about all this stuff for a long time, and I don't think she's totally into it, but she was like, okay, I think I'm starting to get it. It's kind of like compost. And I'm like, yes, because she's really into gardening right now. And so, like the deep, rich, like compost with the worms, but the nutrients and like the giving life and like the cracking open of the seeds, like the acorns got to get cracked open to grow into the, the oak tree. And so even just like beginning to start to be slightly enamored with those darker aspects of life and to realize that's your natural state as a woman. Like I think I'd like to invite everyone into the beginning of a love affair, with the dark feminine, of just beginning to open up to these darker aspects and doing the exploration when it feels right. And I believe that the more you explore your dark, that then you have more capacity for light.
Yeah. Oh, and you are just such an amazing embodiment of this, because when you invite everyone into the love affair, man, it sounds so seductive. It's like, who could say no? Yes. Like,
You want to come into the dark. I know you do. All of you do.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for gifting everyone this death ritual. I will definitely put the link in the show notes and in the comments, and send it out to everyone. That sounds like a great place to start. And also, Christina, will you tell everyone the name of your Facebook group? And I'll also put the link for that as well, if they'd like to join and learn more.
So the Facebook group is called the Feminine Operating System Sisterhood. And so you can find that on Facebook if you and ask to join, and then we'll also put the link around here. And I'd love to have you, because, I always say, I'm like, listen, there's no woman out there that has this figured out, of how to be in the natural design of our feminine power, because nobody's taught us how to do it. I don't have it all figured out either. But I really think we need to open source this as a sisterhood. So I'm very passionate about like creating a space where we can figure this all out together. Even a few years ago, I had a live event and I invited Sheila to speak on my stage, because I was like, we need to understand these concepts of birth, like the literal birth and the metaphoric birth, and understanding how contraction actions are affecting us in our life and in our business. And so I am very passionate about creating a community for all of us to figure this out so that we can do the rewiring and step into our full raw feminine power and use that for what we came here to do on the planet.
Oh yes, 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 yes. And I just want to like echo Christina in that like the feminine thrives in sisterhood. And for me, like our sisterhood has been such a gift. I've learned so much from you. I've learned so much from your community. And I really want to encourage anybody that's interested. And if you are into birth, you are in the realm of the dark feminine. So I would definitely encourage that. Christina, thank you so much for being here today. Is there anything that you want to share that you haven't already before we say goodbye?
Let's see. I think just an invitation of, you know, for every woman listening, like there is a place where you have access to this raw feminine power. And I see it like the primordial substance from which like all life comes. If you want to think of the big bang, you know, like that's the amount of raw feminine power that you have access to inside you. Now, I understand none of us are really, I'm not fully in it either. Like, I don't know a woman who's fully in her raw feminine power. So we're all figuring this out together. And it takes, you know, breaking free from the conditioning and like all the, you know, kind of sort of beliefs that we had that we need to squash that power, that because it is a bit terrifying. I mean, there is chaos in there. Like it can rip things apart. If you think of like the power of a black hole, right? Like it is terrifying, but we can figure out how to be in this raw feminine power altogether. And it's just one step at a time, learning how to like throw off the, you know, shackles of societal conditioning and find that true power inside you. And like, let's keep walking there together. Because when we get there and we learn our natural design so that we can surrender into this instinctual knowing inside us that I know can be amazing to, you know, bring with you into birth. And for those of us with our businesses that we can bring into our businesses, like there's a new way. I guess I want to just keep reminding you that somewhere deep down, you know, there's a new way. And it's time for us to take that new way because the dark feminine's coming in with her sword of truth and love to slice away all that does not serve, right? Like we're in this time and age where the old ways are dying and ideally the new ways are here to be reborn. But nothing can be reborn without dying first.
Yeah.
So let's all accept the invitation from the dark feminine into the dark, into the death so that we can be reborn together and create the world that we know is possible in our bones.
Yeah. I mean, when we look around now and the world might seem frightening or scary or unrecognizable, I think we've all had in the last few months, in addition to those feelings of like, ooh, what's going to happen now? Right? Like, ooh, nature's getting a rest from all the emissions. Ooh, like there's that. So that's like, that like little bit of glee with the death is what the invitation that Christina's inviting us all into. So I also want to say I'm so honored to have Christina coming into the ecstatic birth practitioner training to share some of her wisdom there. Because as I've said, like birth is the realm of the dark feminine. And the more we can really learn to embrace these energies, the more we expand in our potential for pleasure, the more we expand in our potential for ecstasy, which really is also a deep surrender. So Christine, I'm so excited to have you in that program as well. And I'm going to put the link in here as well for the guest teacher masterclass series, if anybody's interested in looking into that and joining us for that. So with that, Christina, so honored and excited to have you here today. I'm looking forward to sharing this with the whole ecstatic birth community and just really on the edge of my seat with you and your truly, truly visionary work. Thank you for sharing your gifts with us here today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you to all of you who've joined us today. Thank you.